Welcome to our latest webinar in the COVID Community Support Series. US Ignite has been staging a set of discussions for COVID responses in local communities. Our local response nationally has been our biggest asset, and community sharing practices back and forth with one another is absolutely a vital tool that we can all use to develop effective practices, effective responses, and help each other get out of the crisis that we're currently facing with COVID and build the world that we think we need to direct towards once we emerge from this great pause. We're joined by a number of great guests today who are going to talk about practices to support local and small businesses in their area to get them started again as the economy sort of starts back up or more fully gets robust again. We're going to be talking to Joaquin Torres. He's the Director of Economic and Workforce Development for the City of San Francisco. They have a very diverse community. He's going to talk about their practices to address all of their sectors in their community. We'll also be talking to Sabangali Cook, Director of Business Development and Strategy for the Government of Washington, D.C. They run a very excellent microloan program there, and D.C. is an incredibly diverse community with lots of unique needs, so we'll hear from them about their practices and experiences to address their community. We'll hear from Tom Snyder. He's the Executive Director of Riot, and it's in the North Carolina Triangle region. They're a startup accelerator and a number of other activities that help build small businesses, especially in the tech sector, but they have a broad reach into a number of communities. And then we'll hear from Jocelyn from St. Petersburg and Kim Vogel also from St. Petersburg about Grow Smarter St. Petersburg and St. Petersburg Greenhouse. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. For the community members here, if you're looking for more information about us, you can find us online at us-ignite.org. My name is Scott Turnbull. I'm the Director of Technology for US Ignite. I'm joined by my colleagues, Mari Silby, the Director of Communications for US Ignite, and also by Lee Davenport, my colleague, who's a Director of Community Development for US Ignite. We're happy to bring this panelist for this discussion today, so we look forward to a great discussion. For attendees to the meeting, we take questions and answers for the panelists here. There'll be a small Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you look, you'll see a Q&A. Just click on that. It'll bring up a window where you can type in questions to be asked to our panelists. We'll run through an overview of their programs, advice for local communities, and then towards the end of this broadcast, we'll address your questions and answers to them as best we can and get to as many as we can. Sometimes we have more questions and answers than we can get to, but we'll do our best to do that during this. Thank you very much. I'd love to start today talking with Joaquin Torres. He's Director of Economic and Workforce Development for the City of San Francisco. Joaquin, welcome. It's great to have you here today. Can you talk a little bit about the unique challenges that San Francisco is facing in the midst of this COVID crisis, and maybe some of the differences that they've had before? I know the Offices of Economic and Workforce Development has a very large umbrella and a number of community constituents that they serve. So could you talk about the problems you're facing and how you're addressing those challenges?
Yeah, certainly, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be on with everyone today, and I really appreciate everyone making the time so that we can share information with each other across divisions, across sectors, across county lines, across the country. I'm very pleased that I'm able to have conversations with my counterparts across the country, internationally as well, about how we're collectively facing the issues that so many of our communities are facing right now, and how beneficial that support network has been in addressing this crisis. Widespread severe impacts, just very quickly, the millions of Californians that are currently facing unemployment right now. More than 83,000 San Franciscans have filed for unemployment benefits since March. The increase in weight of allowing gig workers and independent contractors to finally be able to see those numbers as well in terms of unemployment benefits being accessed. The level of need, it goes without saying, across neighborhoods, across industries, is unprecedented. Many of our businesses have temporarily closed or are finding ways to adapt to stay open. And right now the conversation is about recovery, 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 both in the medium and long term, but also in the very near term as we work with our public health officials to adjust the allowances that allow for increased economic activity while keeping an eye on the public health indicators and the relationship to those allowances that we provide, all in the name of how do we keep our economy moving while keeping everyone safe, thinking about childcare, thinking about who comes to work and how, thinking about our businesses and workers and who is most vulnerable in these environments, and ensuring that they are thought of and protected, and strategically looking at the issues that we need for them. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak. We've been, I think, pretty hard at work since the beginning of this process. Being one of the early actors in ensuring that we had a shelter in place in order, I think, has saved thousands of lives. And it's certainly made it the case that we are very proud in San Francisco that we've been able to effectively act and not seeing the same levels of pressures that other jurisdictions across the country have seen in terms of the pressures on their healthcare system and infrastructure. We've been very, very lucky. So we've been able to focus on a lot of the resources for small businesses, new grant programs, new loan programs, leveraging state dollars to expand and leverage the investments that we make, drawing on philanthropy. One of the core components of our philanthropic frame is, in addition to food security, in addition to housing stabilization, focusing on access to resources for vulnerable workers, as well as small businesses. And the relationship between the two is important to recognize as well. In addition to that, access to information like webinars like these, making ourselves, through our partners, in every single channel that we can turn to make sure that we're getting our information out there, like our website, oewd.org is a constant phrase right now, so that people can quickly gain access to information in a much more nuanced and tailored manner, whether you're an employee, whether you're a small business or business, around all industries, or you're a nonprofit that is serving our industries and our people right now and need people to talk to directly. The conversations, as you know, as so many workers know, about all the complications with trying to access an actual person and a voice is what we're trying to address through this service. So we're very proud about how quickly all these efforts have been brought to light, the advocacy at the state and federal level. Again, that coordination with our partners across the country has been essential to that advocacy, and then sharing best practices as well to make sure that we're just constantly thinking about other resources beyond what we have to bring to bear are accessible, are brought to light, so that everyone knows where a resource may exist. And we are very cognizant and clear with folks that it is not enough what we currently have in hand, and constantly through our advocacy and communications, letting people know that more needs to be done. The work cannot stop. It is going to be iterative and exhausting in terms of us doing this work, and we just can't stop.
Yeah, that's great. So I had a question about sort of so the federal government has issued big injections of capital, obviously, as well as state governments and other entities as well. But there's a large gulf between availability of capital at the high level and how that can be used effectively on the ground. Can you talk about maybe 3 key things that you think San Francisco has in place to make sure that that capital or those opportunities can be used effectively to actually make a difference for small business, as opposed to maybe having it disappear into different sectors that's in an uncontrolled way?
It's an issue. It's absolutely an issue. We've been highlighting on that in terms of our engagement with the financial institutions to make sure that they are being very clear with us as a city about how they're prioritizing their clients. And that if we're not getting a clear answer, or their clients are not getting a clear answer from them, we're helping to guide them towards other partners so that they have multiple channels to access the PPP program, for example.
Right.
The advocacy around making sure that it's actually of value to them, whether they're a nonprofit or a small business, and making sure that businesses understand that we're at work around the flexibilities they need to turn those loans into grants and what the terms are for forgiveness. I also think the partnership of our CDFIs is essential in terms of the financial education and assistance that are being provided to small businesses at this time. And then just constant communications, making sure that people understand what resources exist, what assistance is available, and also, again, what other partners are out there that can guide them towards accessing those resources, and helping them understand what that process is going to look like, and getting them prepared to be good applicants for those resources.
Right, right. And San Francisco is obviously well known both for its strong tech sector, but also for this very rich and diverse local business community. And tech can sometimes dominate the discussion when it comes to growth and things. So how is San Francisco approaching the balance of need between sort of tech sector, which sometimes can really suck up a lot of those discussions, and local community businesses? How are you helping to balance that discussion?
That's exactly the conversation. Later on today, we have our second meeting of our Economic Recovery Task Force,
Mm.
where we talk across industries about the need to support jobs and business development, vulnerable communities, of which
Mm.
small businesses and local small neighborhood commercial corridors and the businesses that occupy those areas, what their very specific needs are, in relationship, of course, to larger growth that we want to continue to pursue and see during a very difficult financial time.
Right.
So that's where those conversations are taking place right now. We brought together across industries and across nonprofits, across small business owners themselves, who are opining about what those needs can and should be. We've already also seen Jack Dorsey and his investment in San Francisco, a $15 million investment to help support our philanthropic goals. Here in the city has been important. At the same time, I was on the phone earlier today talking about a business who couldn't get a PPP loan through their original lender, who they've had a long-standing relationship with,
Sure.
but did through Square. So those flexibilities that have been allowed have actually borne some fruit. And again, we're also looking to our CDFI partners to support that as well. So there's been some synergy there. And I think that's going to be one of the key lessons and key ingredients for us to find success.
Right. Thank you. And maybe you can address the pillars of sort of the community and sort of local businesses, minority-owned businesses, and the specific challenges that they're facing. Because as we know, these PPP loans are available, but they don't make it across all sectors as it should. And to me, that seems to be a barrier to sort of a broad-based economic recovery if we're not broadly distributing that support. So can you talk about the sort of the challenges they face and specifically how you're addressing them in San Francisco?
Certainly, again, it's about access and diversity of partners and resources, and making sure that those communities, those industry leaders, are aware of where those exist if they are not finding traction with their originally intended channel of accessing those resources. Also making sure that they understand where they can plug in to provide their advocacy with us as a city, and also having those conversations with folks through strategic working groups, whether we're talking about long-term recovery or whether we're talking about reopening in the immediate and near term. Having that level of conversation and access, I think, is first and foremost the most important aspect of doing this work. In terms of the very specific needs, again, it's about where am I getting my information? Why is it my bank isn't talking to me? Why do I continue to be representative of a community of color that is continually disinvested in, even in this extreme moment of need right now? Obviously, you hear the passion in my voice, which is why it's important that the moment we hear those concerns, we're able to take them and help them inform the products that we're refining or developing or getting to relaunch. Ensuring there is geographic equity in how we're distributing our resources. Ensuring where we can, and this is where the philanthropic and flexibility of those dollars comes into play, where and how we can focus based on those very specific communities beyond simply zip code, and actually beginning to be able to talk about very specific communities that have not experienced the same levels of opportunity or investment even prior to COVID and its impacts. So focusing in those areas and being very keen about where is their level of access and what can we do in terms of program development to shape that to meet their needs. And then also a very specific point is around, say, the immigrant population. Where are they going to gain access to resources? And how are we going to ensure that we as a city choose partners that are making that a priority to ensure that we're working with folks like those local community development finance institutions that are making that a priority so that those communities can be served. It's just being cognizant of what's going on the ground, understanding the streets, understanding the realities of individual personalities and businesses across industries, and seeing where you can plug them in. If you don't have those relationships, if you do not have those relationships prior to this time, you are already behind the curve in terms of meeting their very immediate and particular needs. And you're already starting to see some of those shifts happen at the state level, the federal level, who are finally understanding that if you're not paying attention to the very specific needs of our communities on the ground, then you're not meeting their needs. And if we're going to do that, we have to maintain that dialogue.
That's great. Thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate it. You're able to ask questions of any of our panelists using the Q&A button. So Joaquin, I hope you'll hang around a little bit for some of the questions that we may have coming in, but thank you very much for sharing that insight. And thank you very much for helping your community move forward. I know it's helping the entire country.
Well, it's only possible because we have an extraordinary leader in our Mayor, London Braid, and it really does take an extraordinary leader during these times to help infiltrate the amount of energy and direction that's needed to make all of this work. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce everyone to Supangali Cook. She's the Director of Business Development and Strategy for the Government of Washington, D.C. They have a very effective, they have all the challenges of a broad community as well. D.C. is very, very large. We'll get into some of that, but they also have a very successful micro grant program. I'm a big fan of micro grant programs, having helped run support for some communities. I found that these smaller investments tend to have a higher payoff. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit about that. So Supangali, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about the approach that DC has to this recovery, and I would love to hear a little bit about the micro grant program.
Sure. I mean, I echo literally everything that Joaquin has said, so I won't repeat. I think exactly what he has said is the sentiments of everyone on this phone that is responsible for some of this work. As it pertains to the micro grant, I mean, we're still in the throes of it right now. But I will say just, kind of how we started. Obviously, our mayor, Mayor Bowser, and the members of the council early on put together a $25 million investment fund to support relief of small businesses here, and but not just small businesses. So what was unique about this particular fund is that we wanted it to encompass everything. So we wanted it to be for small businesses. We wanted it, nonprofits to be eligible. We wanted gig workers to be eligible, contractors, solopreneurs, like all of those. And so your creatives, all of those. And so obviously with that yeoman's task, that's where we kind of started. Obviously for us, which I'm sure for anyone who's been putting together some sort of fund or relief, you're thinking about what are the things that are most important in your community and your footprint. And so for us, the things that were really important is, all right, we know that we have businesses and individuals they're facing a lot of mental, emotional, and just, operational trauma, right? And so trying to create some sort of ease by which they can apply, thinking about like this should be a process that should be much more clinical in its process and even in review so that it's quick. It should be based, on numbers that they're providing, and equity is always a part of every decision that you make. Yeah. Here in DC, obviously we have 8 wards, we call them, and there's a council member for every ward here in the district. And so, and we definitely have some underrepresented communities as well, like I know most cities do. So obviously that's something that's always top of mind. The other thing that we kept thinking about is, okay, we need to make sure that we're also getting this money out as quick as possible. So whatever we need to do, we need to make sure that we can get it out fast. So that means we need to be nimble. And so, thinking about what is DC government really good at and what are we not good at? And so, just working backwards from there. Government, not really the fastest in disbursement. So, all right, that means we need to bring in some partners to help us with that part, and that's where we leaned on our CDFIs here to say, hey, we'll run the program, but at the point that we do, a funding decision for a particular business, we send them now to you, CDFI, to do the disbursement. We want that disbursement to happen very quickly. And so, that's when we brought in our CDFI partners to play a very, very key role in this process in building out the microgrant program. And so when the mayor charged us with this task, we set it up in 5 days. We launched it, and it opened for a week. We closed it April 1st. And then within 3.5 weeks, we started doing notifications to businesses. We received about 7,600 applications. So that's a lot. And about 500 or so were like nonprofits. 4,100 were roughly your small businesses. We had about 3,000 or so that really encompass like your solopreneurs, your gig workers, your your independent contractors, your cab drivers, your lifts, those kind of things. So you had those folks in there as well. So that's kind of like the makeup of the folks that applied. And so, we had to break out for ourselves this. We want this to be a very clinical process. That means we need to kind of have a formula. And so here in our office, we have an economic intelligence team. And I worked with that team to kind of, map out what kind of formula we needed to put in place to support businesses that are being impacted by the law in terms of restrictions, your essential versus your non-essential, your gig workers, your contractors, all of that. And so, pairing them up into, in our minds into groups or buckets, if you will, to determine what the need might look like. And so we knew that in building this, that we wanted to, try to mimic what the professionals have done, meaning the federal SBA. I mean, they've been doing disaster relief for years. So we thought, okay, well, maybe we take a page out of their book and develop ours in sync with that. We don't want to ask for more than what they already require was, important. But let's try to attempt to kind of align ourselves with that. So even if they're applying for ours, whenever the SBA loans come on board, they literally can just use that same information, if you will.
Right.
So we thought that would be a great way to start, align with that. And that's what we did. We launched it, and within 24 hours, wait a minute, this week, this can't work, And so what we did was we were identifying the way we were tracking and trying to qualify, your disaster or your economic trauma that you were having. We were creating a period in time. So we were saying, okay, well, SBA says that the disaster started January 30th. So that means we want to look at your February, March, income, your revenue, your operating expense, and then we'll take it from there. We were already in March at that time, and going into April, and businesses were like, wait, but you can't really tell my travesty because it happened in, February, it happened in, March. So this isn't fair. It'll look off. And so thankfully we were able to pivot. We turned around and was like, you know what, they have a point. We were going to abandon the notion of kind of aligning ourselves with the work that the SBA is doing, and we're just going to go and do what we do. And so that's exactly what we did. We spent about 24 hours, thinking that that's a good idea. Let's go ahead and change our period of time where we're claiming the disaster started was when the mayor declared the disaster for DC. And that was definitely much more palatable. And that was a great lesson learned because we knew that we obviously were going to continue to listen to our stakeholders and what they felt was important. And that allowed us to be as nimble, which I mentioned before is important.
Right.
And it worked, right? We heard, we listened, we responded. And that worked out well. And so inside of a week, like I said, we closed. And inside of 3.5 weeks, we started doing notifications to 7,000 businesses and thinking about like, okay, how do you do this? You just can't send all these letters in one day.
Yeah.
Because you have your CDFIs on the tail end that is now getting ready to do disbursement, right? So, thinking about the logistics of it all when you're trying to move dollars quickly, be sensitive to everyone's needs, and make sure that we're also not overloading our partners too. But like right now, that this is where we are. We've completed all of our initial notifications to all of the businesses. Everyone who's applied has gotten some level of notification, whether it's incomplete, you're conditionally awarded, whatever the case may be. And the CDFIs are off to the races doing awards. And so, obviously for us, we're thinking about like, all right, we dug into the information to see like how many businesses actually applied and what does it look like? Do we have, is there still enough support through this micro grant that's helping businesses in some of our underrepresented communities. And how do we capture additional dollars to support those underrepresented communities as well? Because I think everybody is aware, and there's so much research about communities in crisis after things like this, that it's very difficult on the recovery side for some of these communities. And it's just, I mean, it just is. And so obviously we're thinking through that and how do we continue to support? And so for us, not only did we have this micro grant program, we began to coordinate with some of our other stakeholders here. We have, I mean, this is a huge tourist town, like I'm sure a lot of other cities here. We work with our events DC, who manages our convention centers and ballparks and all these other theaters that we have. And they had, you know, an $18 million fund. And then we had another entity that had a little bit of money. And so we thought, let's coordinate. We know that we have limited resources, and this is not an isolated event. Everyone is experiencing this. So we need to coordinate around these anchoring institutions that have their own funds and identify how do we make sure that we are spreading this the best way that we can. You know, we have an education fund, we have our community foundation, and their priority is to make sure that we continue to stabilize our nonprofits in the region. You know, we have some of our high net worth individuals that are also donating. And so how do we, you know, do that? And so the goal is to continue to not only work with our local resources, but then those private dollars and then even those federal dollars so that we can make sure that we're covering all the gaps. You know, and so there has to be a coordinated approach around these anchoring institutions that are doing these disbursements for funds. So it's not just about our dollars on the local side, but also the monies that we're getting from our other partners, and then quickly trying to pivot and apply for the dollars that are coming through, like EDA. I'm sure, I mean, that RFA just, you know, released. So we're preparing our packet for EDA, and what does that look like? And how do we plan to use those dollars? And so thinking about the work that has to fall into play for those things. The mayor's priority right now, as I know most people have created some sort of economic recovery task force, we have too. Our priorities are housing, small business, and workforce. Those literally cross everything. And so as we're thinking about how we continue to push our agendas before COVID, how do we in this current posture do that and then continue to, ideate beyond that, right? I think everybody is pivoting to the recovery. And what does that look like while you're in this response still? What does recovery look like? Not just 3 months from now, not 18 months from now, but 3, 4, or 5 years from now. And so those are the kinds of things that we have been thinking about, and even just in reopening. A couple of things are happening to ensure that we are working with as many, residents, stakeholders as possible to talk through what these ideas look like and being creative. And so one of the things that we're really doing with our small businesses, our immigrant entrepreneurs, and our Black and Brown and minority-owned businesses and contractors is thinking about how can we help them pivot. As I think Joaquin mentioned, they're using their CDFIs to do a lot of technical assistance. And so one of the things that we're focused on here on a parallel track, while of course we're, issuing micro grants and working on federal resources and private dollars and coordinating with a lot of our other larger anchoring institutions to spread the love. It is about how do we help empower our businesses with the kind of information that allows them to pivot in the way that they think is best for their business, right? So we're not prescribing what that might be, but how do we deliver information to empower that owner to say, this is exactly where I see myself going. Right. And so, and that means, again, coordinated approach. And so we're thinking about how do we do technical assistance in a way that there's one place that you go. There's one air traffic controller who is mining all of the resources wherever you are in your stage of development and in business, right? And so because everyone is at a different place.
Sure.
businesses may need a curriculum and classes and workshops. Others might just need, hey, I just need some help thinking through how I pivot because I do this and I do this, but I'm not sure how to get into the game or whatever the case may be. And so think about how we have one entity, one leading entity externally that can help us coordinate all the assistance for small businesses and think about what some of those tracks might be so that we're leading businesses where they are, because all of them are not at the same place, right?
That's great.
And thinking about where those resources come from. We have existing programs, like I'm sure most of other cities do. They have existing programs within their agencies for TA. But as we're capturing federal dollars and coupling that with our local resources as well, let's see how we can spread that across the district to support all our different kinds of businesses, because some federal dollars are CDBG funds. Obviously, that is very specific. And so how do we spread all of that across the city to support all of the businesses that might need support, and even being thematic. We have our hospitality industry, you have your professional services, you have your micro businesses, you have your, so like thinking through what does that look like, but to have one place where there's an air traffic controller saying, this is where you can get the help that you need. You start here, and they can mind map that for you, the resources that you might need based on where you are in your business,
Thank you. So
Yeah.
I love what your answer is great, because I didn't even have to do a follow-up question, because you sort of hit on the key metrics you're collecting, the community outreach and the individual sort of help with them through that program, tapping of local pillar institutions that are sources of capital. Those are all really great approaches. I did want to make sure that the attendees knew about a resource in DC. The DC government has a great website called coronavirus.dc.gov that contains a lot of information about all of these programs. I really want to, Subangli, thank you so much for sharing that experience with us today. If you'll hang on for questions that we might have at the bottom, I'd love to move on now to Tom Snyder, who's the executive director for Riot in North Carolina. Tom is a leader of a startup accelerator there out of the Wireless Innovation Center that was started, and he has a number of initiatives, including Mission R, that I know he's going to talk about today. So welcome, Tom. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the approach that North Carolina is taking to this relief effort.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thanks for having me, Scott. And before I begin, I think, we just heard, both from San Francisco and DC, just how massive and how complex the challenges are right now. And I don't think that local government is getting enough credit for just how much they're accomplishing. It is truly amazing how much is getting done that isn't necessarily on the kind of entertainment news channels in the evening. So thank you for everybody on the line for what you're doing. So I'm Tom Snyder. I lead Riot. We're a nonprofit organization focused on economic development based out of North Carolina. And as we have always worked, our focus is around job creation, and job creation happens at the forefront of technology. And so as the COVID situation descended upon us, we immediately thought, how can we start to activate the tech community, the entrepreneurial community, which we work with very closely, and what kind of contributions can we have to maybe bring to bear in partnership with a number of our government partners. And so one of the things that we did immediately is we launched a project that we call Mission R. We kind of posed it as a moonshot project, but the idea was that we have a dual crisis in front of us, both the health situation, but then also the economic situation. And how do we just crowdsource from the community folks that have incredible ideas, or folks that have resources and don't know how to deploy them? And so through some convening and gathering that we already do as an organization, and then through a lot of kind of the teaching and mentoring that we do, helping early stage ventures to launch and to create jobs, we launched 6 different projects that are all related in some way to either the health or economic challenge that's in front of us. And we're in the midst right now of a 6-week project sprint. We've got about 2 weeks left. Some of the projects have launched already, and I'll give one example, is a project called COVID Mobilize. When we look at the immense needs that we have across all of our communities right now, there are many organizations that have resources that potentially can meet those needs, but those resources are not well coordinated or aligned For example, I'm sure everyone on the line has heard somewhere of a distillery that's suddenly making hand sanitizer, or a textiles factory that's now making face masks or other PPE. But think about the fact that distillery really had no professional network in how to sell hand sanitizer into the supply chain where something like that might happen. And so COVID Mobilize, which you can find at covidmobilize.com, is an effort that kind of connects those who have resources to those that have needs, and does kind of digital matchmaking to help figure out how to connect the solutions to the problems, and vice versa, in ways that don't happen overnight. Normally when you build a business, the first thing you do is you go out and you do customer discovery, and you learn your network, and you figure out who are all the key stakeholders and players, and you kind of build your business around all of those things. When you're suddenly having to pivot, that's very different. And so we can, again, apply technology in ways to create connections that can hopefully connect solutions and problems much more quickly. So that's one example of the kind of thing that we do. And then we look at how do we then take these solutions that start off very ad hoc because they're very quick and hopefully effective, but then over time wrap around them. What is it that makes them sustainable? What is it that makes them grow? What is it that makes them scale? That's one of the great things with working with US Ignite over the years is the ability to learn from our friends and neighbors around the country that are doing really interesting things through an organization that operates nationally, that can help us to not reinvent the wheel, to do things and learn things from other places that we can then apply in our own, and vice versa. And so we try to make all of the work that we do open source, if you will, to share with others and hopefully grow it and scale it. And the reality is, if you solve these problems in a good way, those turn into sustainable businesses, and those create jobs. And that's something that I think we all need more of right now, as so many people are being furloughed and not sure where the world is going to go. Our viewpoint is not that the economy is shut down, but simply that the market has changed, and we need to adjust to that change, and that is going to continue to change and evolve as certain businesses reopen and behaviors restart again. But it's never going to go back exactly to how it was. So how can we help to help any organization to pivot to that new market that creates the new jobs and the new solutions and so forth?
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining. So actually, I want to touch base on that sort of business pivot. What are the key things that a business needs to start thinking about now that you're discovering, especially startups? What are the thinking that they need to break to sort of prepare them for whatever this new, where, as you said, there is an economy, it's just new, we need to pivot towards it. So what are the key things they need to do to make that effective?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is to recognize that kind of pausing and waiting and then going back to how things were is an unlikely strategy. There are some kinds of businesses that maybe feels more normal, like a restaurant maybe isn't going to fundamentally change that much down the road. Sure. However, even in industries like that, we're seeing the ability to leverage much more digital tools for online ordering and deliveries and other kinds of things. But getting out and talking to customers and understanding the market, this is the greatest time to be doing great, customer discovery. Early on in a startup's journey, they learn to do this, but really every company should be doing customer discovery all the time, because markets always change. And if you don't change, eventually you're obsolete. So I think that's a big one. Another is that right now is a great time to kind of just work on your business, to clean up some things that maybe you knew that you needed to do that you didn't have the bandwidth to do, or that there were other distractions. Now is the time to take care of those nagging things that you should have done that you didn't. So there are a number of different areas, but I think the biggest is to recognize that there always is opportunity, but opportunity doesn't usually come to you. You have to go to it.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that insight, Tom. I know people can find out a little bit more about Riot and their national outreach. I know you run a couple of startup and residence programs, as well as I think some distance ones as well. But you can find that at riot.org for more information on their program and what they're doing there. Thank you very much, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
So I'd like to turn now to an effort that we have going on, that we've discovered going on in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'd like to introduce Jocelyn Howard of Grow Smarter St. Petersburg and Kim Vogel of the St. Petersburg Greenhouse. They're going to talk a little bit about the Business Resilience team and their organizations as well. So welcome, Jocelyn, and welcome, Kim. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
So Grow Smarter, just for a little bit of background, is an economic development strategy here in St. Petersburg. We are based in the Chamber of Commerce, and our goal really is to bring inclusive prosperity to the city. So we do that through bringing a focus of equity to economic development efforts. We're a collective impact, so a lot of our strength comes from a network of community partners across sectors, from nonprofit, government, private sector. And we are foundation funded. So when this all began in our city, we decided to pivot a good amount of our funding to some community support efforts. And sort of the biggest branch of those efforts is a program we're calling the Business Resiliency Team. And it's a partnership not just between the Chamber and Grow Smarter, but also with the Greenhouse, which Kim will explain a little bit more about in a minute, as well as our local Economic Development Corporation. And the goal really of the team is to bring businesses to stability. It's kind of modeled off of healthcare navigators, which is something that both Kim and I have done in the past. So just like with a person, we're wanting to get these businesses stable and healthy as soon as possible. So what we're doing with these navigators is that they're doing kind of intake needs assessments with businesses we're reaching out to, connecting those businesses to resources or information, like several folks have mentioned on the panel so far, is a really important need. And something I think really pretty unique about this is that we've also done a campaign we're calling Give Us 5. We have solicited professionals throughout the community to volunteer 5 hours of their time. So the team members, the navigators, are also able to connect businesses to those volunteer professionals. So just like we were hearing, a lot of businesses are trying to, figure out pivoting their online presence so then they can have access to a marketing professional who can really help them direct those efforts. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim to talk a little bit more about the Greenhouse, as well as kind of how we're operationalizing this.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Kim, welcome. I'd love to hear a little bit about Greenhouse. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This is, it's really quite the honor to be on with all of you and to know that Jocelyn and I were actually messaging each other saying, oh, we sit on our little peninsula, here in Florida, just thinking that maybe we're the only ones. And it's really nice to know that the work that we're doing is very on point with other communities across the country. And I think the one thing that I am most proud of what St. Petersburg has been able to do is that we've worked really hard to build like a very positive kind of infrastructure, strategic infrastructure, really focusing on, really 6 strategic areas. And that's exactly what Grow Smarter brought. And part of that, the part that I manage is a place called the Greenhouse. And it's an actual place, but it's a public-private partnership between the city of St. Petersburg, their economic development team, and then the Chamber of Commerce. And it is a straight up partnership. We literally sell ourselves as we are the front door to all things small business for St. Petersburg, and that the economy grows when we support the local economy, and we are there for resources, education, mentorship, navigation, and also to be really the start of the ecosystem to introduce folks into the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the economic development ecosystem. That's really what we're all about. And when the crisis hit, we all had to leave our offices, all had to come home, do the thing. And, interestingly enough, the city part of my team, took exactly, what's happening in Washington, D.C. and had to spend, the days. They didn't get it done in 5 days, by the way, Spelia. So congratulations to you guys, or the 24 hours. But they built what they called we're calling the Fighting Chance Fund, right? And so our city economic development team has been totally and completely focused on the Fighting Chance Fund. So, the normal programming that was happening at the Greenhouse wasn't happening anymore because it didn't exist in the way that it did anymore, right? And so we were all like in the middle of making this pivot, not only as organizations, our small businesses are, but also all of us as organizations, as these support organizations. And we already had a navigation program going through the greenhouse, and we were very proud of the work that we were doing. So we knew that we could do this. And so when we got to it, and we knew that Grow Smarter, that we could partner with Grow Smarter to do this, it just became this really kind of natural solution, right? Is that, man, if we can just take and wrap around services around these small businesses, and to Jocelyn's point, right, treat them as we would somebody in the healthcare system or in the social service system, and just wrap around services and support and resources, that we could make a difference, that we could take the national statistics that we all kind of start seeing on, I like how you called it the entertainment news. How do we lower that? How are we going to lower that within our community, whatever that statistic is? We had a hypothesis throughout our economic development, stuff, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it came to fruition, this idea of, those businesses that they're really good at what they do. They're really good at dog grooming. They're really good at serving awesome food, but there wasn't really any strategy behind them. We knew that those were going to be the ones that we had to get to ASAP, because they were living on those razor thin margins. And so we did impact studies immediately. We gathered tons of information. I mean, we reached out to 2,400 businesses within the community right away within the first couple of weeks, and said, how are you? What's going on? What do you need? And with all of that really good information, really built out what we call our stability matrix, and how we're gonna do whatever we can to bring stability back, resiliency back within 90 days. Now, that's
Sure.
who knows if 90 days is where we're going to be at really in 90 days, but right, 90 days, we'll reevaluate and we'll see what happens, 120 days later. So we believe that this is, we know that we're on a navigation path, and we want to continue that navigation path even after we get through COVID. And we've been working towards this. But we really see that this has huge potential, at least within our community, and is making an impact already on our small businesses. And we're able to get them hooked up with the funding that they need and the resources that they need. Really
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I know we posted where they can find out a little bit more about Grow Smarter St. Pete in the chat. We'll also post out those resources later. Thank you very much, Kim and Jocelyn. Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mari Silby. We've had a Q&A in the background and some in private channels. Is there a question you think that's been arisen from that we might ask the panel? I know we're short on time, but is there one that sort of came out that you think was begging to be asked?
Well, there really were a bunch that sort of came in through other channels. One of the things that was mentioned early on, Joaquin, you mentioned some of the reaching out, the engagement that you're doing with some of the funding and lending partners. Can you talk about how communities should think about reaching out to make sure that those lending partners are actually facilitating and dispersing funds in a way that is useful for your community?
In terms of the CDFI relationships that we have, yeah. So we're directly involved with a majority of them here in the city to really talk about, and really it's their advocacy that's driving a lot of it. And we can simply respond because we've been having so many conversations about what we believe our shared priorities are, especially with communities of color, with minority small business owners and entrepreneurs, and making sure that those connections are taking place. I think it's simply that. Continue to challenge your local organizations, your local government partners, of saying, well, have you thought about this? Because it could be a difference between one more sentence, one more point made with a local government official who allows them to make a policy change that can lead to a more directed investment, where there might be some rules, especially here in California, that people might think are insurmountable. And that is not always the case. People can always be more creative in terms of how we're delivering resources to our communities in need. And I think that's what's being asked of all of us right now.
I would also ask just one more question that I'll throw in for Sabangali, which is you talked about some of the anchor institutions or anchor organizations, for example, Events DC, that you are working with to try to coordinate funding and resources and make sure that they're used most efficiently. What other types of anchor organizations would you recommend that communities look to as they're trying to, again, sort of pool all of these resources as much as possible?
I would think definitely any of your community foundations. It would be key. I've noted United Ways across the country are doing a lot of work that it seems a thematic from what we've been able to in our research. They're doing a lot on the workforce and residential side of the house. And so, you know, understanding as they are getting donations, how they're funneling those dollars to residents. So, I mean, so in our minds, like, all right, well, United Way, it seems to be doing a lot more on the residential side and on the workforce side of the house for residents, right? And then you might have our community foundation, which is definitely, while they're focused on business and the like, their main priority is preserving our nonprofits here in the area. And so then with our Events DC, they're more focused on our hospitality and restaurant industry. Then we have an education fund. Obviously, you know, that goes into, that's for our DCPS and schools and education and learning, and that, you know, connects our libraries. And so what that funding kind of looks like as it's being deployed. And so as we're thinking about the funding and where it's being deployed, you know, we're trying to identify where are the gaps, you know, like a lot of folks have talked about how you reimagine and help businesses pivot, you know, who has the larger resources, who needs something, and businesses that can probably provide those services, and how can we help some of these businesses pivot? Maybe it is just a small investment to help them do that. And so that's how we're coordinating. So yeah, definitely United Ways, we've seen something similar with our foundations. You know, we talked to them quite a bit to understand, you know, obviously their focus is, you know, supporting the nonprofits, but as we're continuing to gather private dollars and stuff like that, we are obviously thinking about, okay, where with our partners do we need to now put this money? What is the priority? And so obviously that's going to change as we all evolve, and the needs will change as we continue to move towards more of a recovery phase. And so we know that it'll change. The other thing to add to what Joaquin was mentioning is the way we've been working with our CDFIs, knowing that our financial institutions, our banks and credit unions, you know, largely they won't necessarily give money to the city, but they deploy their dollars to the CDFIs. And so our conversation to the CDFIs is understanding timing by which dollars are going to come into into the district. But then not only that, as they are having their own community conversations externally and internally, you know, we're thinking about, okay, as you begin to dole out funding to your CDFIs that you're working with, our request is, we know that the CDFIs are going to be thinking about new products that can support businesses like loans, but, you know, advocating to say, hey, is there an opportunity that you might even offer grants or relax some of your provisions around the dollars that you are giving the CDFIs? And so having those kind of conversations with the financial institutions that we know are funding our CDFIs, and kind of having that conversation, which allows the CDFIs to be more creative with the monies that they have, that will allow our businesses to tap into that. We know that a lot of our underrepresented entrepreneurs, loans is not the way to go for them. They need a grant. And so, like, you know, trying to advocate for those kinds of things through the folks that are doing the funding, that are doing the grant making, to relax their, you know, their allowable provisions, I guess, in having the CDFIs build new programs and products that will support the community.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for your insight today. We heard a lot of great feedback from the various communities that really are the pillar of the response to this COVID emergency here. My favorite question I wasn't able to get to today, but I would encourage us to talk about it online, which is we have this great pause here that we're going to be emerging from. This is a real opportunity to rebuild the world the way we think it should be. We're seeing misalignments, and any gaps that currently exist are exacerbated in emergency. So I would love to hear from you online, and tweet to us at US_Ignite on Twitter or any of the other social media challenges. But we'd love to hear your strategies for what kind of world should we be building towards to make sure that these aren't problems in the future. I'm sorry we don't have time to discuss that today, but I think it's an important question. I will say that if you visit our website at us-ignite.org, you'll be able to find the funding tools tab on that website. That includes lists of federal funding sources that have become available. There are a number here. You can see some of them listed in the slide right now. Small Business Administration loans are out there right now, as well as EDA CARE grants for supplemental funding that's available. Those opportunities, as well as a number of other opportunities, are available through our website at us-ignite.org. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. I also want to say that we run a cohort of cities that, as I said, are dedicated to economic growth and increasing the quality of life for people through the deployment of advanced technologies. If you're interested in becoming a member city, several of the cities in this call already are, so thank you very much to them for their membership. You can find out more about that at usignite.org and look for the Smart Gigabit Communities program. We welcome you in that conversation, and it's really a great-minded set of community leaders that are helping to form the basis for this recovery nationally. I want to thank you, everybody, for joining us today on this webinar. This will be available online soon on our website. We will have another in a series of these COVID-based webinars here in just a few weeks. We'll be announcing that shortly, so look for us on social media channels and on our website for more information as well. Thank you again for all of our guests for joining us. I really appreciate your insight. Thank you to our attendees for joining us, and we will catch you again in a few more weeks. Thank you.
US Ignite is about smart and connected communities. We're here to learn about how their city can be a smarter city and exchange ideas.
We've become an essential catalyst for the smart cities movement nationwide.
This is really an opportunity to bring together a range of stakeholders to talk about these challenges, think about solutions, and do this in harmony.
One of the things that US Ignite does really well is forming partnerships, whether it's with a university or a small community or a large city.
US Ignite tackle the challenges that our cities and communities are facing, bringing together technology and people to be able to make that happen.
US Ignite plays the role of a middleman and a connector to connect people and organizations that would not normally meet and connect with one another.
This is a community of doers. This is a movement.
I love to get on the phone, meet, and sit down with these cities and hear the incredible stories that they have and just figure out what is the thing that we can do to help them.
We bridge the constituents gap. You can't just use technology. You have to bring people into the equation. And the way to bring people into the equation is by bringing universities and city officials, company officials.
If you are a community and you have a problem and you don't know how to solve it, we can be a place where you can come and ask that question. And not only can we maybe help you find some answers, we might also be able to help you find some resources.
We were able to combine the efforts of the federal government, the NSF funding, and US Ignite was a key player in helping us to understand what the possibilities were there, and quite frankly, the ability to let citizens understand what technology can do for them.
And getting to see all of the leaders that have come together to solve some of these problems, it is such a vibrant group and it is such an enthusiastic group.
The fact that we're able to put all these tools together and have cities understand these tools, I mean, it's wonderful to be part of something big, part of the future.
To see people coming forward to help the community and then everybody driving towards one particular motivation, I think it's a great thing to get going.
We are not nearly done. We are at the very beginning of the smart city evolution. We want to get to the stage where there are lots of cities scaling successful ideas into full-blown smart city solutions.
We feel good about what we're doing to help citizens' lives get better and better.